All right, hello everybody. Welcome to OT with DA. Hope you had an awesome day today. Hello Sierra Hiker 2000. Hello Isnir 74. Hello Vintage Candy Girl. Wits Messy. Ruben. GL Waleen. Deborah. Stephen. Wesley. Deb. Aixa 62. All right. Good evening, Pastor, from Fort Worth, says Ruben. Hola. I got an hola there. I didn't see who that was from. Hello, Stefan. Hello, Nana Faith 74. Hello, Mrs. V. Carter from Australia. Wow. Okay. Greetings. Good morning. Tennessee Quilt Bug says hello from freezing Collegedale. Yeah, it's cold everywhere. It actually wasn't that cold here today. It was extremely cold the last few days. Hey, Jean-Sebastian, mon ami, je t'aime. Let's see, Cassandra, great to see you. Anyway, what I was saying is it's warmer here today than it was the last few days. Hello, Victor. But many of you know I was in Southern California anyway, so I wasn't getting the, move my chair all the way up here. I wasn't getting the cold weather. Hello, Alyssa. Hello, Iquajada. Oh, I probably totally murdered that one. Hello, Grammy Paparazzi. Jean, I'm sorry. Is my French terrible? All I can say is my friend, I love you, and a few other things to get around. Let's see. Try Anthony says, hi, David, from Emily and Anthony from Loma Linda, my people. Emily and Anthony, of course. Awesome. Josh Barton, what's up, bro? Man, I'll see you in about, 45 days or something like that. Can't wait to see you, give you a big hug, you and the family. Elvin Harpist, hello. Jerry Bet HD says, good evening from Kansas City. Hello, Avery. Hello, Amy. Hello, Rich 77AA. Rich Applegate. Okay, there we go. Great to see you, Rich. Blessed Chuck. Josh says, I can't wait. Brother, let's hang out. Let's finally go on that snorkeling trip we keep talking about. Hello, Stacy. Hello, Deb. Jean says, I love you too. Your French is great. Oh, my friend, you're too kind. Good morning from the Philippines. All right. Oh, Jerry Beth D. Got it. Not Jerry Bet HD. Jerry Beth. Got it. Sometimes it's hard to say. All right. I love you all. Hello from, where's that? Michigan? Hello, Annie478. Hello, Flory Len. Hello, Supriya Star, my sister. So great to see you. Tooth Doctor. Yeah, I learned that yesterday, right? Not to the doctor, but Tooth Doctor. I remember, I wonder how many of these I'm mispronouncing. Bernice Benabe, sister, come visit me. Bring your boyfriend. Hello, let's see, who do we got here? Ollie Squad, Sherry Mayer, Maria King 186 says hello from Walla Walla Valley. All right, greetings everybody. Hope you had a great day. I had an awesome day today. And by awesome, I mean very, very productive. Yesterday was a bit of yesterday was a reasonable day too, a good day. But when you come back from these big, long, involved speaking appointments, which are absolutely amazing, they're mountaintop experiences, as I described yesterday, our time in Loma Linda, myself, Jeffrey, Ty, was amazing. But you have to come back and decompress a little bit. Yesterday was a big decompress day. I thought today might have also been a bit of a sort of just decompress, but I didn't have time today to decompress. I had so many things that I needed to accomplish, and I'm happy to report that today was a highly productive day, including getting, I love making lists. I don't know if I've said this before on one of the With DAs, but I love making lists and then checking things off. And I had a number of things that I wanted to get off my list today, or I put on my list last night with my wife, Violetta, and then checking them off today, including I even got in a great workout with my youngest son, Jabel, who's back from Tennessee. Today we did legs and squats and even a little bit of bench press. So highly productive day. Had an amazing meal tonight too. My wife's Colombian beans and rice with some eggs on the side, with my new Matatui seasonings, which, by the way, I put a post about this up on my Instagram. But the Matatui seasonings, which is the name for the seasoning and spices line from my friends Matt and Josie Minikis, who I've known for more than 2 decades. They make the most amazing seasonings and spices. So if you want to learn more about that, you can go watch my Instagram post from a couple days ago. But they have a sale that is presently going and ends on January 21st. And I think the sale ends then because they're going on tour and they won't be able to, a musical tour, because they're also amazing musicians, they won't be able to fulfill the order. So if you haven't already tried Matatui seasonings, I highly recommend that you do. I actually have a new favorite. My favorite for the last 2 years has been his smoked habanero, which sounds really spicy, but it's actually not very spicy. The flavor profile is incredible. That's been my favorite, that and smoked 7. But tonight, on my beans and rice, with, again, eggs on the side, I tried a new spice, a brand new one this year, a new seasoning, and I think it might be my new favorite. I actually texted Matt. I was like, Matt, this pickled jalapeno is probably my new favorite. And so if you haven't yet ordered anything from Matatui, let me just tell you, let me make your life better, okay? And I have no financial interest whatsoever in this. I just love Matt, and I love great, beautiful, well-made things. And Matt and Josie, I love them. I love their ministry. I love their humility. I love that they are so excellent and so old world craftsmanship at all the things they do, whether it's music production, or the making of these spices. Anyway, if you haven't already done so, order 3 seasonings from Matatui Seasoning, and these are the 3 you get. If you're not sure which ones to order, because I think he has probably close to 15 or 20 varieties now, here's what you want. You want, if you like smoked flavors, which I do, you want these 3. Smoked habanero, smoked 7, and then the new pickled jalapeno. And if you like others, then you can try other flavors as well. I tried the new Calypso. It's very spicy. I love it. Anyway, big shout out to Matt and Josie. Order some of these seasonings. They are amazing. I mean, I'm not even just saying that. Amazing. I had somebody say to me, Israel Ramos said to me on my Instagram account, "You're a great salesman." And then I responded and said, "Yes, but only for things that I actually believe in and love." So I have no problem saying, hey, you should buy a Conflict Beautiful. I have no problem saying you should go to an Arise Intensive or a Try This at Home marriage seminar, or you should buy Matatui seasonings. I'm going to promote the things that I believe in, things that are made well by friends of mine, people that I love and believe in. So yes, I suppose in that regard, I am a salesman, but again, only for things that I really love and really believe in. And speaking of that, look at my new shirt I got here. This is a shirt from the Loma Linda Young Adult Ministry, led out by my good friend Philip, who I talked about yesterday. And the ministry is Praxis. And you got to see the back of the shirt. The back of the shirt's the best part. And I don't think I turned. Oh, I did turn. Look at this. Let me just show you this. Look at the back. It says Praxis. See if I bend down so you can see it. I love that logo. Very cool. All right. So representing my Praxis shirt. They're not for sale, by the way. I'm not selling anything. I'm just letting you know. But I got to tell you this. Speaking of things that are beautiful and well-made and that are not for sale, I got a gift today, and it was totally unexpected. And I'm not going to say who the giver of the gift was because I didn't ask their permission, and they might want to remain anonymous. We'll find out. I actually invited this person to come and join me on an OT with DA, and we're going to see if the schedule can work out. But anyway, totally unexpected. I'll just tell a little bit of the background here. I saw this person recently, and they had a digital tablet. And I saw them writing on this digital tablet, and I was like, wow, that thing's incredible. And I asked them about it, and they said, oh, it's called Remarkable. I'd never heard of it. And this person, a dear friend, was showing me, by the way, it's not any of the people that have been on OT with DA so far. Okay, so it's not Jennifer, it's not Nathan, it's not the other Nathan. Anyway, it would be a new guest. And I was like, dude, that thing's incredible. I love that. And they were showing me how it works. And totally blown away today. My wife literally just handed this to me about 1 hour ago and said, hey, look what came in the mail. And it is a remarkable tablet, better paper, better thinking. So this is the tablet that I was looking at. It's not opened yet because I literally just got it. And so a giant thank you to the gift giver. You know who you are. And then this is the sort of premium leather brown case that it comes in. Absolutely incredible. It's called Remarkable. I haven't used it yet, so I can't talk about how awesome it is or isn't, but this person that was using it said it's amazing, it's incredible, and I also got this pen that came with it. So look at that gift. It's not even Christmas, it's the New Year, and I got this amazing, completely unexpected gift from a dear friend. And if this dear friend is able to come on OT with DA and they're willing for you to know who they are, then we can thank them publicly for this amazing gift. Okay, one more final thing that I've got to say, and welcome everybody. So glad you're here. Looking forward to chapter 21. Okay, so I sat down today and did something that I don't normally do when it comes to the With DA series. And I've done a little bit of this for like a week or 2 weeks, but I began to get a little nervous that I wasn't going to have enough time to finish all of what I need to do in terms of the remaining chapters before I have to leave to go to Australia. And as you might remember, when we did Patriarchs and Prophets, I actually brought all of my camera equipment over, set it up in Scott and Lynn Penman's house, and it was awesome, but it was also a total mission. And I said, I'll never do that again because I have all this anxiety about the equipment and did it make it? And, you know, it's expensive and I can't replace it. Plus just taking over somebody's house and, you know, it was too much of a mission. I won't do that again. So I only have so much time to finish up the last 40 chapters. So today I sat down and I was like, okay, how much time do I have between now and February 28 when I have to fly out to Australia? And it's actually pretty tight because, as I've mentioned, I have an appointment in Norway and I might go visit my son for a long weekend. So anyway, all of that is to say this. I have actually put together a schedule for the remainder of the book that is probably about 95 to 100% accurate. But here's the deal. There are going to be probably 5 or 6, maybe as many as 7 sessions that will be double sessions. Now, that doesn't mean that they will be twice as long. Our sessions have been averaging about an hour and a half. So I'm not saying that they're going to be 3 hours long. What I'm saying is that we will cover 2 chapters in one session. Now, don't get too worried about that or upset about that or discouraged by that, because I actually went through and a number of the chapters, I spent time today going through the whole book and looking at short chapters and seeing if there are obvious chapters that fit together nicely. And happily, there are, like I say, not less than 5 and not more than 7 that we will do jointly. Okay, not tonight. Tonight's just chapter 21. Tomorrow night is chapter 22. That's on Jonah, if I'm not mistaken. But just a heads up, not tomorrow night, but the night after, we will do our first double session. I'll remind you of this, by the way, and I'll put it up on my, I'll put it up on the Instagram post and the Facebook post. We will do chapters 23 and 24 together. Okay, which means that we'll cover both chapters. We'll do it in about the same amount of time, I hope. We'll see. But we will go through the rubric for both. We'll have a word for both. So chapters 23 and 24 will be our first attempt at doing a double session. And I apologize for that. It wasn't the plan, but it's just worked out that I have to find about 4 or 5 days between now and February 20. I think I fly out on the 28th or the 29th to Australia. So anyway, just a heads up, I'll keep you alert and abreast of the changes, but I wanted you to know that because it's coming in just a few days. Also, good news, I have a guest that will be with us on Sunday night. So a fresh guest. I won't tell you exactly who it's going to be, but it's one of the people that I've mentioned before. And so we've got a guest coming. I've got guests lined up now. Okay, so I've got 1, 2, 3, and maybe 4 guests lined up, and they'll each come for between 2 and maybe 3 or 4 sessions. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Can't wait. All right, tonight, chapter 21, Elisha's closing ministry. And let's start with prayer, and then we'll get into this chapter. Sorry for all the preamble, but I had a lot of things to tell you. I've been gone. I've been gone for 9 days or 8 days or whatever it was. So apologies for the preamble, but let's get into this. Father in heaven, bless us now as we look at chapter 21, the closing ministry of Elisha, a powerful, faithful, spirit-filled man of God. Lord, may we receive the inspiration, the instruction that we should receive from this chapter and from this man's life. Be with us now, Father, and may these ideas not just be abstract or sort of difficult to get our hands wrapped around, but Lord, put legs on these lessons and put feet on our faith so that we can make these things real and actual in our lives is my prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, you guys ready? Let's do this. So chapter 21, Elisha's closing ministry. Now, this was one of those chapters, and we get these occasionally where a great deal of material is covered. And when I get these chapters, just for my own sort of sanity's sake, what I do is I just sort of outline the chapter. And fortunately for us, this is a fairly easy chapter to outline. So I'm just going to share with you briefly how I outlined this chapter. We are not going to read much of this chapter, though there are some select paragraphs that we're definitely going to read, because this is kind of what we might call a helicopter chapter, right? Like flying over the top of a number of different stories. And the ministry of Elisha was a very long ministry. We'll talk about the nature of the length of Elisha's ministry, but let's just sort of outline the chapter here. First of all, again, chapter 21, Elisha's closing ministry. We've been with Elisha for the last several chapters. I mean, going all the way back to the call of Elisha in chapter 17, tonight's chapter 21. So this is going to draw the curtain over the ministry of Elisha, at least as far as our time in Prophets and Kings. We spent quite a bit of time in we spent quite a bit of time in the ministry of the prophet Elijah and now Elisha, and this will be our final chapter honing in on the ministry of Elisha. And for that reason, quite a lot of ground is covered here. And let me just outline the chapter for you. First of all, there is an intro, and about the first 3 or 4 paragraphs are introductory, and we'll read a couple of those, maybe all of those in a moment. Okay, then we basically go through 5 major events. Number 1, Elisha reveals the king of Syria's plans. This is described in 2 Kings 6, and I should say that the material covered in this chapter stretches from 2 Kings 6 all the way through to 2 Kings 13, but really only 2 Kings 6, 7, and a little bit of 8. Actually, no, none of 8. Basically, 1 Kings 6 and 7, and then skipping over a lot of material, and then chapter 13. So 2 Kings chapter 6, 7, and 13, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's correct. So the first major thing that happens in this chapter that's described is Elisha reveals the king of Syria's plans. That's 2 Kings 6. The second major thing is the siege, that terrible, tragic siege of Samaria, and the miraculous deliverance that follows. That is described in 2 Kings 6 and then bleeding over into 7. Also, as a sort of sub-story inside of that story is the story, the great story, the wonderful story, the incomparable story of the 4 leprous men who go out and discover that the camp of those that had besieged Samaria, that they've all fled. We'll get to that in due time. So that's kind of under that. The number 3, the floating axe head, is just sort of briefly mentioned, only a paragraph or 2, maybe 3. That's also in 2 Kings 6. Then Elisha's sick and he's dying, and the story of the arrow of victory. And then finally, there is the death of Elisha and kind of a summary. So intro, 4 main stories, and then the recap and the final words about Elisha and his passing. Okay, so again, we're not going to spend a tremendous amount of time because when I read through this, I thought there is a very unifying theme here. There are a number of sub-themes, but for me, I thought there was a single theme that really unified all of these stories. And that theme, as you might have imagined, is reflected in my word. And I'm really happy with my word. I'll get more to that in a little bit. So let's start by reminding ourselves, or maybe not reminding, but saying that the ministry of Elisha was a very long ministry, probably at least twice as long as the ministry of Elijah. And I didn't myself dig into this in 1 Kings and 2 Kings. I didn't have the time for that today, but I quickly Googled it and saw a number of different websites. And what I saw is it looks like the ministry of Elijah, let's start with Elijah. Elijah's ministry lasted somewhere around 20 years. I saw estimates as little as 17 years and as much as sort of 25 or 26 years, where the ministry of Elisha, by contrast, lasts up to 50 or maybe even 60 or more years. I saw one website that said 63 years. So the ministry of Elisha, just in terms of the amount of material that's covered, the amount of time that's covered, is tremendous. And that's actually how the chapter opens, right? Let's just read that here. Called to the prophetic office while Ahab was still reigning, Elisha had lived to see many changes take place in the kingdom of Israel. Judgment upon judgment had befallen the Israelites during the reign of Hazael the Syrian, who had been anointed to be the scourge of the apostate nation. The stern measures of reform instituted by Jehu had resulted in the slaying of all the house of Ahab. In continued wars with the Syrians, Jehoahaz, Jehu's successor, had lost some of the cities lying east of the Jordan. For a time, it had seemed as if the Syrians might gain control of the entire kingdom, but the reformation begun by Elijah and carried forward by Elisha had led many to inquire after God, that is to say, after Yahweh, after the one true God. The altars of Baal were being forsaken, and slowly yet surely, that's a crucial phrase, God's purpose was being fulfilled in the lives of those who chose to serve him with all the heart. Okay, so this is a great introductory paragraph that lets us know that Elisha's ministry had a huge span, historical span, right from the time of Ahab, which of course Elijah was also alive during the time of Ahab, all the way through up, as we will see, to 2 Kings chapter 13 and the death of Elisha, spanning some 50 to 60 plus years. That's his ministry. So he lived a long life. Also, she mentions briefly here in this first paragraph, the slaying of all the house of Ahab. And that was, we've already covered some of that material. You might remember that sort of chapters, 2 Kings chapter. We jumped ahead to this, going all the way back to chapter 16, which was the fall of the house of Ahab. I'm just sort of orienting us here. We spent a little bit of time in 9. We spent some time in 10, 11. So we've covered some of this material already when she did another chapter similar to this chapter, where she covered like a lot of material, a lot of information. So even though in this chapter we're going from 2 Kings 6 all the way to 12, or 13, excuse me. Is it 12 or 13? The death of Elisha. 13. 2 Kings 6 all the way to 13. Some of this material in 9, 10, and 11 we've already covered. Okay, not in depth, but we did cover the fall of the house of Ahab. And in that chapter, chapter 16 in Prophets and Kings, we covered that material. Okay, let's read the next paragraph. It was because of his love for erring Israel that God permitted the Syrians to scourge them. She uses that word permitted twice in this paragraph, both very important usages. It was because of his compassion for those whose moral power was weak that he raised up Jehu to slay wicked Jezebel and all the house of Ahab. And I went back today and read that story, or that section on the death of Jezebel. Jehu slays Jezebel. It's described in 2 Kings 9, verses 30 to 37. It says, once more, through a merciful providence, the priests of Baal and Ashtoreth were set aside and their heathen altars thrown down. God in his wisdom foresaw that if temptation were removed, some would forsake heathenism and turn their faces heavenward. This is also what happened, as you might remember, with the death of all the false prophets on Mount Carmel. God did that because, number one, they were apostate. Number two, they were in total incorrigible rebellion against God, but also to try and protect the next generation, to take away the stumbling block, to take away the temptation. And that's exactly what's being described here. Some would forsake heathenism and turn their faces heavenward. And this is why he, second usage here, permitted calamity after calamity to befall them. His judgments were tempered with mercy, and when his purpose was accomplished, he turned the tide in favor of those who had learned to inquire after him. So she's covering a lot of historical and theological ground here, basically saying that the reforms that were initiated under the prophetic ministry of Elijah and carried forward under the long prophetic ministry of Elisha were, as she says, slow but sure. And it was a kind of glacial transition away from Baal and Ashtoreth and other deities to Yahweh. But the point is that the point she's making here is that the Syrians continued to harass, continued to attack Israel, and God allowed this. He permitted it. That's the key word there. Precisely because the judgments of Yahweh, these tempered judgments of Yahweh, tempered with mercy, as she says there, that last sentence that we just read at the end of the second paragraph, these tempered judgments allowed the people to continue to find their footing, not with the false gods of Baal and Ashtoreth, but with Yahweh. And this was beginning to have an effect over the long-term, decades-long ministry of Elisha. We're going to read one more paragraph, introductory paragraph here, the third, because here, the text behind the text, the power behind the power, because the primary problem isn't Syria, the primary problem isn't the surrounding nations, the primary problem facing God's covenant and God's covenant people is Satan. And that's what she addresses herself to in chapter 3, God's arch enemy. While influences for good and for evil were striving for the ascendancy, and Satan was doing all in his power to complete the ruin he had brought about during the reign of Ahab and Jezebel, Elisha continued to bear testimony. So we would say it this way: Satan is playing the long game, right, through the ministry of Ahab and Jezebel and then their successors. But God is also playing the long game, beginning this reformation with Elijah and the rain that didn't fall, and then the showdown on Mount Carmel, and then the transition to Elisha's ministry. So this is a long game, and it reminds us of Matthew chapter 13. Remember where Jesus said that you have to let both the wheat and the tares grow together until the harvest. And built into Matthew chapter 13 is this idea that things will take longer than we would otherwise like. And one of the favorite questions that the prophets and the psalmists will ask repeatedly of Yahweh is what? How long? How long? How long will this continue? How long these judgments? How long this time of strife and of difficulty in this great conflict between the powers of evil and the powers of righteousness and goodness? Okay, let's just finish the rest of that paragraph. Throughout the kingdom, he was honored and venerated. I don't think I read that next sentence there. Elisha continued to bear his testimony. He met with opposition, yet none could gainsay his words. Throughout the kingdom, he was honored and venerated. Many came to him for counsel. And I don't know if you noticed how many times in both the Bible and in this chapter, Elisha is referred to as father, because he occupied that fatherly, paternal role to this growing, slow but sure glacial revival that was taking place in Israel. Okay, and so he's called father, and that's what she's basically alluding to here. He was honored and venerated. Many came to him for counsel. While Jezebel was still living, Joram, the king of Israel, sought his advice. And once, when in Damascus, he was visited by messengers from Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, who desired to learn whether a sickness then upon him would result in death. And then she closes with this sentence to the introductory paragraphs. To all the prophet bore faithful witness in a time when on every hand truth was being perverted, and the great majority of the people were still in open rebellion against heaven. So we might be tempted to think that in the wake of the showdown on Mount Carmel and the death of Ahab, and then eventually the death of Jezebel, that things would take on that there would be a catalyzing effect, and there would be this cascade, this quick transition away from these idols and toward Yahweh. But it was slow. It was very slow. And the reason that it was slow is that, well, there are a variety of reasons. Number one, the naturally rebellious human heart. Number two, as we talked about in Davidson's book, The Flame of Yahweh, the specific invention of many of these gods and the way that these gods were worshipped, especially in the fertility cults, made them like tailor-made for the carnal man's experience and desires, right? And so it was a slow transition, a glacial transition away from these various deities and gods, in quotation marks, to Yahweh. And that's what she's describing here. But that sentence is a crucial sentence there. That last one, I'll read it again. To all the prophet bore faithful witness in a time when on every hand truth was being perverted and the great majority of the people were in open rebellion against heaven. Okay, so those are the introductory paragraphs. We read the first three there. The first event then, the first of the four events, major events that we encounter in this chapter, is Elisha revealing the king of Syria's plans. Now, this story is told again in 2 Kings 6. It's actually quite a funny story. I'm turning the page here. And I found that even though there are some really sad, like tragic, beyond tragic elements in this chapter that are covered, not only in Prophets and Kings chapter 21, but in the corresponding biblical chapters, there's some really sad stuff. There's also some really humorous stuff. I mean, funny stuff. In fact, on this page alone, I just turned the page in my Types and Symbols book here. So I'm on pages 244 and 245. Now check this out. On these two pages, the spread that's in front of me here, I wrote LOL, which is of course short for laugh out loud, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 5 times I wrote on this one, this 2-page spread, I found myself writing, that's funny, that's funny, that's funny, that's funny, and that's funny. Okay, so let's just, as we kind of tell the story, let's talk about some of these things that even in the midst of tragedy, were actually quite humorous. At least the way they're communicated was humorous. So the first one is where the king of Syria is completely befuddled by the fact that whenever he tries to launch an attack against Israel, it appears as though Israel knows that he's coming. And so eventually the king of Syria is like, hey, which one of you is for Israel? Because somebody's telling my plans to the king of Israel. Who is it? And then one of his servants speaks up and says, and this is an LOL moment. This is funny. None, my lord, O king, but Elisha the prophet who is in Israel. He tells the king of Israel the words that you speak in your bedroom. Right? Like, that's unnerving, right? There are things that I say, I suppose, both to myself and to my kids and to my wife and to my colleagues, things in the privacy or what I assume to be the privacy of my own life that I just wouldn't want everybody and anybody to know. And so I can imagine that when the king of Syria heard this, he was like, what? He knows what I say in my bedroom? Right now, of course, the specific point here is that these attacks that are planned are, short-circuited by Elisha's awareness of where you're going to attack, but it's funny. He's like, hey, this guy even knows the kind of stuff you're saying in your bedroom. So then the king of Syria is like, well, who is this Elisha and where does he live? And they're like, well, he lives in a place called Dothan. So he's like, we're going to take care of this guy because he's effectively a spy, right? A prophet or whatever. Of course, they don't believe in Yahweh, but they got to get rid of him. And so they send out a large, what does it say there? It says they sent out a large group, not a full army maybe, but a lot of people to try to take Elisha, to kill him or to take him captive or whatever, to stop all of this. And it says, I'm on page 244 now, in terror, Elisha's servant sought him with the news, right? Because he sees all these army that are surrounding Dothan, where Elisha is, and all the horses and all the chariots. And he comes to Elisha and he says, alas, my master. He said, what shall we do? And then this is so great. Can't you just feel, and this is another kind of LOL moment, can't you just feel the total calmness of Elisha when this frantic servant reports to him that they're surrounded? Do not fear was the answer of the prophet. For those who are with us are more than those who are with them. This has a Romans, Romans 8:31. If God be for us, who can be against us? Isn't that 8:31? Let me just double check. I really don't like misquoting scripture. Yeah. If God is for us, who can be against us? This has a Romans 8:31 feel, right? For those who are with us are more than those who are with them. That must have left a completely puzzled look on the face of this servant, right? And anybody else that would have heard Elisha say such an absurd thing. And then, that the servant might know this for himself, Elisha prayed, Yahweh, I pray, open his eyes that he may see. Then Yahweh opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses, chariots of fire all around Elisha. Between the servant of God and the host of armed foemen was an encircling band of heavenly angels. And then this next sentence is incredible. Hone in on this. This is big time. And I don't have time to develop this, but I'm going to just talk about it briefly. Next sentence. They had come down, this angelic force, chariots of fire, angels that excel in strength. Watch this. They had come down in mighty power. 3 key words. Underline them, circle them, highlight them, put a circle around it, a box around it, a star by it. Not to destroy. Mark it down. Not to destroy. And that's going to become very important for us if you know how the story goes. They had come down in mighty power, not to destroy. And we will return to this several times. Not to exact homage, but to encamp round about and minister to the Lord's weak and helpless ones. And then this next short paragraph, it's a single sentence. When the people of God are brought into straight places, that word straight, S-T-R-A-I-T, means difficult places, dark places, right? Not straight as in the opposite of crooked, but straight, S-T-R-A-I-T. When they are brought into straight places, difficult places, trying places, and apparently there is no escape for them, the Lord alone must be their dependence. Can somebody say amen? And this reminded me of the little maid from yesterday, right? The little maid was certainly brought into a straight place, a difficult place. She'd been taken captive. She had been brought to a family. Now, fortunately for her, Naaman and his wife were good people. We talked about this yesterday. I outlined my 15 points, which, by the way, I just remembered. I forgot to put that picture up. So I'll put it up with tomorrow. I'm totally sorry. I forgot about that. I'll put it up. But happily for her, her straight place was she had a bit of a soft landing, even though being taken captive into a foreign land. Perhaps your parents were killed. I mean, who knows? But what did she do? She leaned into Yahweh, just like Joseph of old did when he was sold by his brothers into captivity. I mean, what else are you going to do? When you find yourself in a dark and difficult place, are you going to go it alone or are you going to go it with God? And that's what she says here. She's like, this angelic host, these chariots of fire that came and surrounded, were not there to destroy. Say it again for the people in back. They were not there to destroy, but they were there to protect, right? To keep the peace. And then she says that our eyes should be open and we might not see literal fiery chariots like happened in this miraculous intervention with Elisha praying to Yahweh on behalf of his servant, but we are surrounded. We know this by faith. We know this by the text of Scripture. The angel of the Lord camps round about them that fears him and delivers them. Absolutely incredible. Okay, then there's another LOL moment here. Next paragraph. As the company of Syrian soldiers boldly advanced, ignorant of the unseen hosts of heaven, Elisha prayed to Yahweh and said, strike this people, I pray, with blindness. So his servant has his blindness taken away, his spiritual blindness, and they have their literal sight taken away. There's a lot going on here. Very cool. This whole first story has to do with seeing and not seeing. And he struck them with blindness according to the word of Elisha. Now Elisha said to them, this is funny. This is an LOL moment. So it's like they're all blind. We don't know how many of them there were. It says an army, perhaps 100 or more. We don't know exactly how many, but a significant force. And Elisha, now because they're all blind, Elisha appears to wander out and say something like, hey, are you guys lost? And, they're completely confused and, no, we're not lost. We're looking for Elisha, but we've been struck with blindness. We don't know where we're going. And then hilariously, Elisha says, hey, this is not the way, and this isn't the right city. This isn't where he's at. Follow me, and I will bring you to the man whom you seek. But he led them to Samaria. This is funny. There's just no way around this. People say, the Bible and humor, they don't mix. I'm sorry, you're not reading the same Bible I'm reading. There are many things in the Bible that are just thoroughly funny. God taking control of a situation, not always, but sometimes in a humorous way. I mean, we're going to come up against some other humorous moments in this chapter. So I love this. He's like, no, you're going the wrong way. I mean, first of all, what kind of soldiers would say anything other than, can you get us home? But they're like, no, we must press on. We can't see anything, but we'll follow this random voice. We'll trust him. He's going to take us to the one. And when we get there, I guess we'll apprehend him. How? We're not sure about that. It's funny. And so it says, so it was when they came to Samaria that Elisha said, Yahweh, now open the eyes of these men. Right? So eyes opening and eyes closing and eyes opening, that they may see. So just like his servant earlier, his eyes were open that he might see, their eyes are now opened and they see. But when they open their eyes, what do they see? It says, Yahweh opened their eyes and they saw. And there they were inside Samaria. And this is great. Now, when the king of Israel saw them, man, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall for this interaction. He's totally befuddled, and he says to Elisha, my father, there it is, one of the several instances where he's referred to as my father, shall I kill them? Shall I kill them? Now watch this. But Elisha answered, you shall not kill them. Now let's just think this through. Let's just pause here and dwell on this for a moment. Don't kill them. And let's just read the next line and then dwell on this for a moment. Because he actually introduces a very ethical perspective on war and conflict. Do not kill them. Would you kill those whom you have taken captive with your sword and your bow? In fact, set food and water before them that they may eat and drink and then go home to their master. Okay, so you're probably familiar with what is called the Geneva Convention. And the Geneva Convention has many rules of war. And one of the rules of war, not that these rules are always followed precisely or even loosely in some cases, but the rules of war are when a number of nations got together and said, hey, look, when conflicts arise, when hostilities arise and war arises, we want to be fair in the way that we fight. We're going to agree, like boxers will agree, okay? We're going to box, no kicking, no biting, no punching below the belt. And even like in a wrestling match, I wrestled for years and years and years. There's certain things you can do in a wrestling match and certain things you can't do. Now, obviously, you're trying to overpower the other person. They're trying to overpower you. You're trying to use your strength and your technique and your skills, your flexibility, your mobility, but there's rules. Even within conflict, there's rules. So not only in wrestling, not only in jiu-jitsu, not only in boxing, etc., but also in war. And one of those rules is if you have somebody that's captive, you can't kill captives. And Elisha actually introduces this very principle here, right? The Geneva Convention is still millennia in the future, but this idea that there's a right way and a wrong way, an ethical way and an unethical way to treat those that have been captured by you, by the stronger force. And so I love this because remember, what was that 3-word phrase that I told you to highlight and underline and all of that? They came not to destroy. Not to destroy. So when they're then led blindly into Samaria itself and their eyes are open and they realize that they are totally vulnerable and that the king of Israel could have fallen on them and killed all of them, Elisha says, no, don't do that. You shall not kill them. Now, I'm going to come back to this when I get to my rubric, but I'm just going to dwell on this idea right now that again and again and again and again and again and again and again, we find that God's primary MO, his modus operandi, is not to kill or to destroy, but to try and save, to try and redeem. Even in a situation where it feels like it is irredeemable, non-salvageable, God tries without death to salvage the situation. Now, does God sometimes, as we've already seen, does God sometimes employ the terminal punishment of death? He does. We've already talked about how this isn't murder, because murder involves motivation, and God does not murder, but God can legitimately, legally, and ethically, and justly take back that which is rightfully his, which is life. We talked about this with the prophets of Baal and of Ashtoreth and other instances. The flood is a great example. Okay, so yes, God can and does act in this way, but he doesn't always act in this way. And when you read carefully the conquest of Canaan and how God appears to want to have dispossessed the Canaanites, his primary way is not by destruction, by death, and by war, but through more creative means, as we will see in this very chapter. In this very chapter, we will see an example of those creative means, and we have many of these. We have Jericho falling with the marching around the city. We have God saying repeatedly that he would drive the Canaanites out with hornets. There are many such examples that we could cite where God works in unusual ways. We've already seen it with Jehoshaphat when he sends the singers out in front of the army. Over and over again, we could talk about the the Egyptians being drowned in the Red Sea. Was that a battle that the Israelites waged? No, it was not. Was it a war that they initiated? No, it was not. It was God that did that. And over again, we find that God seeks, insofar as it's possible, to bring about the desired end without unnecessary death and destruction. So Elisha says, you shall not kill them. Now watch this. This is incredible. Give them food and water that they may eat and drink and go to their master. Then he prepared a great feast for them. And after they ate and drank, he sent them away and they went back to their master. Wow, they had a story to tell. And actually, Ellen White here leaves off what I regard as the very best part of the verse. I'm going to read now from 2 Kings chapter 6. She stops it. I'm going to read all of verse 23 and I'll point out where she stops it. Okay, so 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 23. So he prepared a great feast for them. I'm reading in the NIV. And after they had finished eating and drinking, he sent them away and they returned to their master. That's where Ellen White stops it. But notice this last sentence. So the bands from Aram stopped raiding Israel's territory, which was, of course, the goal. And the word so there means, well, this is what happened as a consequence of what happened on this day. They said, you know what? We're not going to mess with this Elisha guy anymore and his God Yahweh. We're going to leave them alone, right? They stopped, and that was the goal. The goal, remember, the goal is not destruction of the surrounding nations. God raised up Abraham and his descendants for the evangelization of the surrounding nations. And wiping people out wholesale is not conducive to, number one, it's not consistent with Yahweh's character. And number two, it's not conducive to evangelizing people in the name of the goodness of the God of Israel, Yahweh. And so, there's a lot going on here. And the net effect was achieved, which is that the raid stopped. That's what it says. So the bands from Aram stopped raiding Israel's territory. Mission accomplished. But in a way that was unexpected. Because if you have your enemy in hand, right, just like David had Saul in hand, but he said, I can't kill him. He's my enemy. He's trying to kill me, but I'm not going to kill him. This was godly. This was in keeping with God's own heart. It's one of the reasons that David is called a man after God's own heart. And I've mentioned this before, but I preached a sermon on this, a long sermon. It was like over an hour. You can find it on YouTube. If you haven't watched it, it's called Jesus, Jehovah, and Genocide. And I preached it at the Kingscliff Church probably almost 10 years ago now, 8 years ago. So go check that sermon out. And I talk about these alternative ways that God had hoped to dispossess the Canaanites. And not primarily to dispossess them, but as with Rahab and others, to try and woo them, to try and convince them. And I go into, and we talked a lot about this in Patriarchs and Prophets too. Okay, this idea. Okay, that's a big, big idea. Okay, now that finishes the first story. The second story then is the siege of Samaria and the miraculous deliverance. This is described in 2 Kings 6 and 7. And in 2 Kings 6, you get this absolutely terrible story. I think it's 2 Kings 6. Let me look here. Yeah, it is. Beginning in verse 24, where Samaria is under siege, and these parents actually begin to eat their children. And it's just beyond, it's unthinkable, right? The idea that you would be so hungry, so desperate for food that you would eat your own children. We know historically that this is a thing that happened, that people would eat other people. And anyway, it's actually described there in 2 Kings 6. Ellen White doesn't actually mention that part, I don't think. She does say, let's just read this, page 245. For a time after this, Israel was free from the attacks of the Syrians, but later, under the energetic direction of a determined king, Hazael, the Syrian host surrounded Samaria and besieged it. Never had Israel been brought into so great a strait as during this siege. The sins of the fathers were indeed being visited upon the children and the children's children. The horrors of prolonged famine were driving the king of Israel to desperate measures when Elisha predicted deliverance the following day. Okay, so she doesn't expressly talk about the eating of one's own children, but that is mentioned tragically, unthinkably, sadly, horrifically in 2 Kings 6. Okay, so this is another LOL moment, which is a funny thing to say or difficult thing to say right on the back of talking about this, the horrors of the siege. But it was insane. It was unthinkable. It was laughable that Elisha would say that, okay, let me just read it to you here. I'm reading at the end of 2 Kings 6. Now, Elisha was sitting in his house, and the elders were sitting with him. The king sent a messenger ahead, but before he arrived, Elisha said to the elders, "Don't you see how this murderer, the king of Israel, is sending someone to cut off my head? Right? Look, when the messenger comes, shut the door and hold it shut against him. Is not the sound of the master's footsteps behind him?" While he was still talking to them, the messenger came down to him. The king said, "This disaster is from the Lord. Why should I wait for the Lord any longer?" Now I'm in chapter 7, verse 1. So this is the interaction with this messenger that's been sent from the king of Israel. Elisha replied, "Hear the word of Yahweh. This is what Yahweh says. About this time tomorrow, a seah of the finest flour," this is like 10 pounds or 12 pounds of the finest flour, "will sell for a shekel," which isn't very much money, "and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria." The officer on whose arm the king was leaning, this is his right-hand man, said to the man of God, "Look, even if Yahweh should open the floodgates of the heavens, could this happen?" And then Elisha says ominously, "You will see it with your own eyes," answered Elisha, "but you will not eat any of it." Okay, this is unthinkable. It's laughable. I imagine that as the messenger goes back, because they didn't let him in the house, as he goes back and he tells the king what Elisha had said, he's like, "Well, Elisha says that tomorrow an enormous amount of flour and barley will be sold for basically no money at all." And I said to him, "How's that going to happen?" And then the prophet said to me, "You will see it, but you won't experience it." I don't know what any of this means. It's funny. It's unrealistic. It's ridiculous. It's absurd. It's unbelievable. It's laughable. So it's another LOL moment. Like there's just no way. So now I'm on page 245. I want to read the paragraph that begins, As the next morning was about to dawn, the Lord caused," now watch this, talk about creative ways to dissuade and dispossess the enemies of Yahweh and the enemies of Yahweh's people. Watch this. "As the next morning was about to dawn, the Lord caused the army of the Syrians to hear the noise of chariots and the noise of horses, the noise of a great army." Well, what does this sound like? It sounds a lot like Gideon's experience, right? Gideon was another example of God using creative ways to drive people out. So they hear what they think is the noise of a great army. This is similar to the first story that we already talked about, in which case both of these stories has Yahweh fighting or intervening directly for his people through supernatural or miraculous means. Okay, in the first case, the chariots of fire and these angels that excel in strength, they surround Elisha. Okay, that's number one. And then here, God causes this miraculous sound, the sound of an enormous army charging toward them. "And they, seized with fear, arose and fled at twilight, leaving the camp intact. Their tents, their horses, their donkeys, with rich stores of food, they fled for their lives, not waiting until the Jordan had been crossed." In other words, they fled so quickly, they just got out of there. Now, notice that they were not destroyed. They were not destroyed. They were dispossessed. They were driven out. They had great fear struck into them by the sound of this angelic host that God had sent, but they were not destroyed. Here again, I want you to feel that this is a theme in this chapter. Number one, not to destroy. Number two, you shall not kill them. Number three, give them food and water. And number four, here, they were driven off, they were dispossessed, they were afraid, but they were not destroyed, importantly. Okay, then we get this great story, which is another great LOL moment. I mean, this is one of the great stories in the Old Testament. I mean, am I right? Every one of us has heard a sermon preached on this. Now, I've never actually preached on this. I've alluded to it several times in various sermons throughout the years, but I've never preached on this passage. But I feel like maybe I should. I mean, it's just that good of a passage. Let's read it. "During the night of the flight, 4 leprous men at the gate of the city, made desperate by hunger." We already talked about the level of desperation in the city. These men are at the gate. They know they're going to die. In fact, it's actually kind of funny the way that it says it. She doesn't quote this. I don't think she quotes it. So if she doesn't quote it, I'll read it out of the Bible because it's really quite funny. During the night of the flight, the 4 leprous men at the gate of the city, made desperate by hunger, had proposed to visit the Syrian camp and throw themselves on the mercy of the besiegers, hoping thereby to arouse sympathy and obtain food, right? You know you're desperate when you're like, let's go to our enemies and maybe they'll have mercy on us, right? That's desperate. What was their astonishment when entering the camp, they found that no one was there? Okay, she doesn't quote it. Let me quote it here. This is too good. It says, okay. Let me find it. They got it flat. Okay, here it is. So I'm reading in 2 Kings chapter 7. This is funny. This is totally humorous, the way that this reads. 2 Kings chapter 7, beginning in verse 3. Now there were 4 men with leprosy at the entrance of the city gate. They said to each other, why stay here until we die? If we say we'll go into the city, the famine is there and we will die. And if we stay here, we will die. So let's go over to the camp of the Arameans and surrender. If they spare us, we live. And if they kill us, then we die. Supremely logical and quite funny. I mean, it's a tragic situation, of course. You know, people starving to death or, you know, on the verge of starving to death is not funny. But you have to appreciate the logic with which they approach the situation. They're like, okay, here's the deal. If we stay here and do nothing, we're going to die. If we go in the city, everybody in the city's dying. So if we go there, we're going to die, and we're lepers, so we're not allowed in the city anyway. But if we cast ourselves, this is like our only option, desperate by hunger, she says. If we cast ourselves on the tender mercies of our oppressors and besiegers, well, maybe they'll say, oh, look at these lepers. Let's have mercy on them. I mean, the chances of this are vanishingly unlikely, but maybe. I mean, if we don't do anything, we're going to die. And if we go in the city, we're going to die. So you know that this is the thinnest of the thinnest of the thinnest of hopes that their besiegers are going to take mercy on them, take pity on them. But they're like, look, we got nothing else to lose. And if they do have mercy on us, we'll live. And if they don't have mercy on us, then we die anyway. Okay, fair enough. I like it. Okay, now this is so great. It says, I'm reading now in Ellen White, bottom of page 245, 258 of the original. What was their astonishment when entering the camp? And just get this picture in your mind's eye here. It's funny, right? They go in, they're nervous, they're waiting to see that first person that's going to say, who are you? And sees them, and then they're going to try to plead for their lives or for some food at least. But they go to tent number 1, nobody's there. Tent number 2, nobody's there. Tent number 3, and pretty soon they're like, there's no noises, there's no fire. Nobody is here. But the horses are tied up, the donkeys are tied up, and they go tent to tent to tent to tent to tent to tent to tent, and they realize, and they just dive in, right? They're just like, food everywhere. They just start eating this food. I mean, they must have been, you know, as the old saying says, in hog heaven, right? They were just like, you got to be kidding. This has exceeded our wildest dreams. We were hoping for the outside chance that they might give us a crust of bread and let us live. And here we're gorging ourselves on all of this delicious food. And in the middle of this gorging, they're like, oh, hey, wait a minute. This isn't right what we're doing right now, because they remembered that they had friends and probably family members in the city, or at least associates in the city. And they realized that the pang of guilt, the realization of guilt washes over them. And this is so good. It says, then they said to one another, we are not doing right. This is a day of good news, and we remain silent. Quickly they returned to the city with the glad news. Now this has got the gospel all over it. We've all probably, many of us have heard a sermon about this. We're lepers, right? Struck with the disease of sin. We're lying at the city gate. If we do nothing, we die. If we go into the city, we die. We're going to die, right? We're infected with the disease of sin, the leprosy of sin, and we're just going to go out and try something. And then we don't realize that God has already worked a miracle on our behalf. God has already delivered us. Friends, that's the gospel. The good news of the gospel, and I preached this over and over and over again this last week when we were in Loma Linda, that the life, death, burial, resurrection, ascension of Jesus is an act of history. It's happened. The ink of history is dry. The deliverance that we need has already been accomplished. And I've preached about this, but I'll just say briefly that God's judgment on sin and the resurrection of the dead in Jewish thinking are end-time events, eschatological events. But what God did with the cross, hear this. This is an incredible insight. If you've never heard it before, your mind is going to be blown in just a moment. But what God did with the cross, watch this, he took an end of history event, that is to say, God's final judgment against sin and the resurrection of the dead, which is described as an eschatological event in the Old Testament. He took an end of history event and he plopped it down right in the middle of history. He plopped an eschatological event right in the middle of history so that for us, living as we are in 2024, we're looking back on the future. Right? I'm going to go straight Michael J. Fox on you here, right? Back to the future. We are looking in the cross event, in the resurrection, in Jesus' ascension, in his being seated at the right hand of God. We, in 2024, are looking back on the future. We know how the judgment's going to go because God has already judged sin and death in the person of Jesus. And we know that God can raise the dead because Jesus himself was raised and others were raised with him, and they are even now seated in heaven. So this, friends, is the most incredible good news. What it tells us is we don't have to fear the judgment because the judgment in principle has already happened. Feel that, hear that, understand that. And I'm going to get to the story of the lepers here in just a minute and make the connection. But friends, an end of history event has already been planted right in the middle of history, so that we, in 2024, are looking back on the future. Sin has been judged. Death has been conquered. Okay, so this is key now. Let's go to the lepers. When the lepers go into the city, right, just in sheer desperation, and that's what we do. We go to God in sheer desperation. We're like, God, we need help. We're going to die. We're overwhelmed with guilt. When we go into the city, so to speak, we realized that the judgment that brings deliverance has already happened, quite apart from us. And what was the job of the lepers? Number one, watch this. This is incredible, you guys. I'm preaching. The responsibility of the lepers, number one, was to enjoy the fruits of a victory already accomplished, independent of them and quite apart from them. And then number two, to announce the good news of a victory already accomplished and of the availability of the fruits of that victory. It's the gospel. I mean, it is 100% the gospel story, the church story, which is why, as you might expect, Ellen White goes immediately into giving words of exhortation in 2 or 3 paragraphs to the church. But friends, I want you to feel that. When they arrived in the camp of the besiegers, the victory was already accomplished. Their responsibility was to believe it, receive it, enjoy the fruits of that victory that, again, I can't emphasize this strongly enough, was accomplished quite apart from them. This was a victory that they would rest in, that they would receive, and then not to just sit idly in that victory, but to go announce, as they say, the glad news, the good tidings. This has got the gospel all over it. There's not a doubt in my mind that God so orchestrated this historical event so as to anticipate the gospel, the deliverance, the experience of that deliverance by the 4 lepers, and the announcement of the good news to those that were in the city preparing to die. And when they go back and announce it, she doesn't go into this, but when they go back and announce it, the people in the city, of course, don't believe this. They shout up to the people on the walls of the city. They're like, hey, you're not going to believe this. But we have some news that is inconceivably greater than you could ever possibly imagine, especially for a city that is so besieged that they are desperate from starvation. But there's nobody in the camp. And then the people shout down from the wall, what? There's nobody in the camp? Yeah, like seriously, we're not kidding. There's nobody in the camp. That would have been a conversation. How do you persuade them that there's, like, well and truly, this isn't a trap. We're not working for them. They haven't put us up to this. There's nobody in the camp. The victory is accomplished. And this is one of the great challenges that we face in preaching the gospel to people, is that the news is almost too good to believe. It's hard to get people to embrace the gospel because the gospel is such good news. God is so amazing. God is so wonderful. God is so beautiful. beyond our wildest dreams, and the deliverance that he has brought about through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus is such great news that some people are like, that's too good. That couldn't possibly be the case. And we're like, no, really it is. We're living it. We're experiencing it. Trust us. It's the case. You have been delivered. You have been set free. God is true. He's good. He's amazing. It's happened. Incredible. Incredible. And so then they send out like a little party that goes and checks it out because, they weren't just going to immediately believe the report of these lepers, but they check it out. And then they find, in fact, that all of the armaments and weapons and even some of the clothes of those that had fled in haste were just on the side of the road. And they realized, well, and so sure enough, the next day, just as Elisha had said, and I'll just read this. This is how 2 Kings 7 ends. It says, I'm reading in verse 17. Now the king had put the officer on whose arm he leaned in charge of the gate. And the people trampled him in the gateway, and he died, just as the man of God had foretold when the king came down to his house. It happened as the man of God had said to the king, quote, about this time tomorrow, a seah of finest flour will sell for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria. The officer had said to the man of God, look, even if Yahweh should open the floodgates of heaven, how could this happen? The man of God replied, you will see it with your eyes, but you will not eat any of it, because he was trampled before he could. And this is exactly what happened to him, for the people trampled him in the gateway, and he died. This is incredible. I love this. Okay, now I'm on the middle of page 246, and I'm going to pick it up here a little bit. Actually, kind of toward the top of 246. Thus the man of God continued to labor from year to year, drawing close to the people in faithful ministry, and in times of crisis, standing by the side of kings as a wise counselor. The long years of idolatrous backsliding on the part of rulers and people had worked their baleful work. The dark shadow of apostasy was still everywhere apparent, yet here and there were those who had steadfastly refused to bow the knee to Baal. As Elisha continued his work of reform, you would have noticed that Ellen White loves the word reform and reformation. She uses it over and over again in this book. Many were reclaimed. I really like that word, reclaimed. It was almost my word for the chapter. I love that word. Many were reclaimed from heathenism, and these learned to rejoice in the service of the true God. The prophet was cheered by these miracles of divine grace. Of course he would be. And he was inspired with a great longing to reach all who were honest in heart. Wherever he was, he endeavored to be a teacher of righteousness. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Okay, so then she has a couple paragraphs here, basically of encouragement to the church. We should probably read these because they're just so encouraging and humbling. From a human point of view, the outlook for the spiritual regeneration of the nation was as hopeless as is the outlook today before God's servants who are laboring in the dark places of the earth. But the Church of Christ is God's agency for the proclamation of truth. She is empowered by him to do a special work, and if she is loyal to God, obedient to his commandments, there will dwell within her the excellency of divine power. If she will be true to her allegiance, there is no power that can stand against her. Amen and amen. That's got that Romans 8:31 feel again, doesn't it? If God is for us, who can be against us? The forces of the enemy will be no more able to overwhelm her than is the chaff to resist the whirlwind. Next paragraph. There is before the church the dawn of a bright, glorious day. If she will but put on the robe of Christ's righteousness, that's the gospel. Withdrawing from all allegiance to the world, God calls upon his faithful ones who believe in him to talk courage to those who are unbelieving and hopeless. That's what we got to do. We got to be like those lepers. We got to go tell the good news. And even if people won't believe it, refuse to believe it, find it hard to believe, we got to tell the good news. We got to be bold. To talk courage to those who are unbelieving and hopeless. Turn to the Lord, you prisoners of hope. What a great phrase, by the way. Prisoners of hope. Seek strength from God, the living God. Show an unwavering, humble faith in his power and his willingness to save. When in faith we take hold of his strength, he will change, wonderfully change, the most hopeless, discouraging outlook. He will do this for the glory of his name. Amen. I almost broke out into song there, right? Just like, oh, I mean, just woo, woo. I mean, wow. Okay, what a story. All right, so that's the second story. We're moving quite slowly here. The third story we won't spend any time on. It's a cute little story found in 2 Kings 6, the axe head that floats. My favorite part about that story is that when the guy loses the axe head, I got to read this quickly here. It says, they went to the Jordan and they began to cut down trees. This was some of the people from the schools of the prophets. So they're cutting down trees, and as one of them was cutting down a tree, the iron axe head fell into the water. Oh no, my lord, he cried out. It was borrowed. You gotta love that, right? I mean, it's like, the Bible is so awesome. I mean, it is just so, and this is another LOL moment, right? Like, you can just see it. He's chopping, and then it's like, whoop, whoop, and he's like, and he turns to Elisha, who's not far, and he's like, Elisha sees it. I imagine Elisha might have had a chuckle. Like, he might have been laughing. He might have thought it was funny. And he's like, oh no, my lord, it was borrowed. That's not even mine. That belongs to Joshua, my neighbor. He's going to kill me. He didn't want me to take it. And I took it, and now it's in the bottom of the water. And Elijah's like, don't worry. Don't worry. We got this. We got this. I mean, it's funny. I just love that little detail. Oh, no. It was borrowed. And I think we all know this. Don't we all know this from experience? We'll all have some story in our life where you borrowed something and you either lost it or you damaged it or you did something to it. And if you lose your own thing, you break your own thing, you mess up your own thing, you're like, oh man, I can't believe I did that. I'm such an idiot. But you lose or break or, ruin somebody else's thing, and you just get this dread that comes upon you, right? Do you know what I'm talking about? You're like, oh no. I just love that the first thing he says is he's like, oh no, I borrowed that axe. Too good. Too good. Okay, that's all we're going to say about that. Then we get to the fourth and final story here, jumping all the way ahead to 2 Kings 13. And this is the story of Elisha. He's in his last days. He's dying, and this is when the king of Israel comes to him, and he says, look, the Assyrians are, or the Syrians rather, not the Assyrians. The Syrians are pushing us. They've taken some of the cities. They're on the east of the Jordan. And then Elisha, even as he's dying, and he's an old man at this point, again, his ministry is like 50 to 60 plus years. Elisha tells him to shoot an arrow. He shoots the arrow. He says, this is the arrow of the Lord's victory. And then he says, take the arrows, smash them on the ground, strike them on the ground. And he strikes 1, 2, 3 times. And Elisha chastises him and says, you should have struck 5 or 6 times, because now you're only going to strike the Syrians 3 times, where you should have gone for it. You should have really leaned in to this, because I'm Elisha. I mean, I have this whole history. My whole history is of great miraculous interventions taking place. And you did 3 times? Come on. You should have done more. And then you get this incredible paragraph, bottom of page 248. And this is, by the way, another all-time paragraph. And I went back and checked, and I think I might have missed one. I'm not sure. But on my all-time page, I only have 2. I only have 2 all-time quotes so far, or all-time passages so far. They are page 168 and 248. And I have this sneaking suspicion that I forgot one that was before 168, but I went through and I couldn't find one. Because I always write all-time, like in the Desire of Ages. I mean, the page, in fact, let me just show it to you real quick. My all-time quotes in the Desire of Ages are so many. Where's my all-time page? I think it's at the front. Maybe I put it at the back, actually. No, it's at the front somewhere. Wasn't planning on showing you this, but let me just see if I can quickly find the all-time page. Well, it's not at the front. Is it at the back? Where is it? I can't find it. Well, this is just impossible. It's like it's been taken out of here. Probably should have done this before I got ready, eh? Wow, where is this? Okay, I'm having a total moment here. Where is my all-time page in Desire of Ages? Okay, well, Let me show you my all-time page in Patriarchs and Prophets. I think it's possible that I put the all-time page for Desire of Ages in the journal. But let me see, did I do that here too? Oh, no, okay. So here's the all-time list for Patriarchs and Prophets right at the beginning. I'll hold that up for you to see. Can you see that? And I'll hold it up for you to see there. Take a screenshot of that, okay? So, I mean, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. 16 all-time quotations in Patriarchs and Prophets, and it's even more than that, Desire of Ages. And yet here we are in Prophets and Kings. We're a third of the way through the book, and I only have 2. I've told you before, I'm enjoying this book, thoroughly enjoying it. It's awesome. But of the 5 volumes in the Conflict of the Ages series, The Conflict Beautiful, this is my least read, and it's probably not the best way to say it. It's also my least favorite. I love it. I still give it a 9 out of 10, right? Or 9.5 out of 10 or whatever. But, you know, I give Patriarchs and Prophets a 10 out of 10. I give Desire of Ages an 11 out of 10. It's my Desert Island book. I give Acts of the Apostles 10 out of 10. And Great Controversy 10 out of 10. Right? So this one only gets a 9 or a 9.5. Still great, still good. But the fact that this is only our second all-time statement, and I want to read it, okay? Bottom of page 248. Starts with the lesson. So now Ellen White's going to make an application of only smacking the arrows on the ground, striking the arrows on the ground 3 times versus 5 or 6. Okay, here it is. This is awesome. This is worth memorizing. The lesson is for all in positions of trust. When God opens the way for the accomplishment of a certain work and gives assurance of success, the chosen instrumentality must do all in his power to bring about the promised result in proportion to the enthusiasm and perseverance. I'll come back to that. In proportion to the enthusiasm and perseverance with which the work of God is carried forward, will be the success given. God can work miracles for his people only as they act their part with untiring energy. He calls for men of devotion and women to his work, men and women of moral courage with ardent love for souls and with a zeal that never flags. Such workers will find no task too arduous. That's a hard word to pronounce. Arduous. There we go. No task too arduous. No prospect too hopeless. They will labor on, undaunted, until apparent defeat is turned into glorious victory. Not even prison walls, nor the martyr's stake beyond, will cause them to swerve from their purpose of laboring together with God for the upbuilding of his kingdom. Woo! That's all time. That's all time. I mean, that is Ellen White at her energetic, enthusiastic, poetic best. And I love that in proportion to the enthusiasm and perseverance. I love that juxtaposition. Just briefly. Enthusiasm is something that I have a lot of. Enthusiasm literally comes, by the way, from its etymology in God, en theos. Enthusiasm, en theos. Enthusiasm is that energy, that passion, that electricity, and enthusiasm is very often how you get a project started, right? But you don't just need enthusiasm, you need enthusiasm and perseverance, which is how you get a project finished. Okay, I love this. I love the juxtaposition of enthusiasm and perseverance. We not only need the enthusiastic electric energy to start a project, to begin something, to commence with some grand effort for the kingdom, but we need the perseverance, the day-to-day Elisha-like mentality to stick it out, to grind day in, day out, year in, year out, decade in, decade out. So I love that. It perfectly fits the chapter. Enthusiasm and perseverance. Let's read the next paragraph. With counsel and encouragement given Joash, the work of Elisha closed. He upon whom had fallen in full measure the Spirit resting upon Elijah, we'll come back to that, had proved faithful to the end. Never had he wavered. Never had he lost his trust in the power of omnipotence. Always, when the way before him seemed utterly closed, he had still advanced by faith, and God had honored his confidence and opened the way before him. never, never, always, faithful to the end. Amazing. So beautiful. Let's just read the last bit here because it's so good. It was not given to Elisha to follow his master in a fiery chariot. Upon him the Lord permitted. She opens with the word permitted twice in that, I think it's the second paragraph. And she closes now in the penultimate paragraph, also with the word permitted. Very interesting. Upon him the Lord permitted to come a lingering illness. During the long hours of human weakness and suffering, his faith laid fast hold on the promises of God, and he beheld ever about him heavenly messengers of comfort and peace. As on the heights of Dothan he had seen the encircling hosts of heaven, the fiery chariots of Israel and the horsemen thereof, so now he was conscious of the presence of sympathizing angels, and he was sustained. Like Jesus in Gethsemane, right? Sustained by a sympathizing angel. Throughout his life, he had exercised strong faith. And as he had advanced in a knowledge of God's providences and of his merciful kindness, faith had ripened into an abiding trust in God. Wow, that's what I want. That's what I want. I want to read that again. Throughout David's life, put your name in here. Throughout David's life, David exercised strong faith. And as David advanced in a knowledge of God's providences and of his merciful kindness, faith ripened in David into an abiding trust in God. And when death called David, he was ready to rest from his labors. Ooh, I love that. I just got the idea right now. I'm just going to make a note to self here to put my own name in there. That is such a great promise. Wow. What a personalized promise. Wow. So good. Oh, I love that. Absolutely love that. And then she closes with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 promises. All biblical. Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. Psalm 116:15. The righteous has a refuge in his death. Proverbs 14:32. With the psalmist, Elisha could say in all confidence, God will redeem my soul from the power of the grave, for he shall receive me. Psalm 49:15. And with rejoicing he could testify, for I know that my Redeemer lives, and he shall stand at last on the earth. Job 19:25. Woo! That's one of the greats. And then finally, Psalm 17:15. As for me, I will see your face in righteousness. I shall be satisfied when I awake in your likeness. What a chapter! What a man of God! What a life of ministry! What an encouragement and a challenge for us. Man, Elisha's closing ministry, this was great. Great, great, so great. Let's do the rubric, shall we? Let's do the rubric. All right, the point, the person, the prayer, the practice, and the promise. Okay, here's what I put. The point of this chapter: to tell of the inspiring and amazing final years of Elisha's faithful prophetic ministry. Truly, God had answered his request to Elijah. Remember what he asked for? A double portion of the Spirit that Yahweh gave to you. Yahweh gave you this much Spirit, this much of his Spirit. I want a double portion. And there are some commentators that have noted, interestingly, that Elisha's ministry was twice as long or more than twice as long as Elijah's ministry, right? Also, if you go through and itemize, if you count the number of miracles in Elijah's ministry, depending on exactly how you count, you come up with like 7 or 8 in Elijah's ministry. But when you count the miracles in Elisha's ministry, you get like 14, 15, or 16, again, depending on how you itemize. This is the beginning of one miracle and the end of a miracle and the beginning of another. But the point is that you have roughly, or perhaps exactly, double the number of miracles recorded in Scripture and twice the amount of time in his prophetic ministry and calling. That's pretty awesome, everybody. Because remember, even when Elisha asked that of Elijah, Elijah was like, that's not the kind of thing I can promise. That's certainly not the kind of thing I can give. So if you see me go up in the fiery chariot, then that'll be God's answer to you. And Elisha did see him go up in the fiery chariot. Now, as she brings out, Elisha didn't get the fiery chariot. Not everybody does. But, in fact, very, very few people get it. At least before the end of time. But he did get something amazing. He got what he asked for, a double portion of the Spirit that was given to Elijah. Elijah had the enthusiasm, right? To go back to our two words there, enthusiasm and perseverance. Elijah's ministry was a ministry of enthusiasm, of energy, of miraculous interventions. It was off to a great start, but that, how does she call it? Slowly yet surely. Doesn't she say that? In the very first paragraph, she says, I'll read this here, but the Reformation begun by Elijah, carried forward by Elisha, had led many to inquire after God. The altars of Baal were being forsaken, and slowly yet surely, God's purpose was being fulfilled in the lives of those who chose to serve him with all the heart. This is really a cool way to think about it. Elijah's ministry was a ministry of enthusiasm, of energy, of electricity, of these incredible divine punctuations like Mount Carmel and the ceasing of the rain and the resumption of the rain. But Elisha's ministry was a ministry of salt. Remember we talked about this? Long, slow, pastoral, year after year, decade after decade. His was the ministry of perseverance. I never saw that until right now, but I just love that juxtaposition of enthusiasm and perseverance. Let me read it again. In proportion to the enthusiasm and perseverance with which the work is carried forward will be the success given. And I'm just going to make a point here to say, because enthusiasm is how we start a thing and perseverance is how we finish a thing. And I'm just going to put here that this is like the ministry of Elijah, and this is like the ministry of Elisha. That is so cool. Just had that thought right now. Okay, so that's the point. That's the point of this chapter. Number 2, the person. All right, there's a lot of different directions you could go here. I went with probably my favorite thing that is revealed here about God and his character and his nature and his disposition, and that is, are you ready for it? God is not naturally a destroyer. God is not naturally a destroyer. Isaiah chapter 28, verses 21 and 22 talk about how God will rise up and do his strange work. Some translations say his foreign work, his alien work. And then verse 22 lets you know that that work was destruction. So it makes sense, right? Like human beings, all human beings bear the image of God. Now, we can ruin that, well, not entirely ruin, but we can eclipse that image. We can degrade that image. We can undermine and compromise that image by our bad choices and by our rebellion, but we all still have the spark of God's image in us. And so it's not natural for God. It's not a thing he likes to do or desires to do to destroy things. He's the creator God. He's the God that wants to bless, that wants to create, that says, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And so I love that that just showed up here unexpectedly. Boom, not to destroy. Those encircling chariots of fire were not to destroy. Powerful. And then when they finally have their eyes opened inside the city gates of Samaria, the Syrians, that is, the king of Israel is like, should we kill him? And Elisha says, you shall not kill them. Give them food, give them water, and send them home. Send them home with the good news that Yahweh is different, and that Elisha is different, and that Israel is different. Man, it kills you to think what could have been, what might have been if Israel and Judah had never been split and had lived up to the full evangelistic commission and anointing that God had for Israel. So much was lost. And so the person, God is not a destroyer. Number 3, the prayer. God opened my eyes to see things as they actually are, right? Just like Elisha prayed for his servant, I want to see things as they are, right? And to go back to those 4 lepers, you know, they were the only ones. They were the ones that were like, no, we're telling you. We're telling you they're gone. They were the only ones that saw the situation for what it was. And so several stories or several instances here kind of converging of God opened my eyes, God opened my eyes, God opened my eyes. Years ago, I preached a sermon on faith called Learning to See from a Blind Man, about blind Bartimaeus. And the definition that I arrived at for faith in that sermon was, are you ready for this? Faith is seeing what God sees and believing what God believes. Faith is seeing what God sees and believing what God believes. Remember, 1 Corinthians 13, love believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. So faith is seeing what God sees. God, give me faith. Help me to see things as they actually are. Okay, the practice. All right, the practice here, you know what I put? I put keep grinding. And that's a phrase that we hear quite a little bit of today, you know, like you got to keep grinding, you got to keep working, you got to keep your nose to the grindstone. It's Rome wasn't built in a day, right? You're not going to accomplish great things. Most of us are not going to accomplish great things in an afternoon, right? What we can do, here's what I wrote. Keep grinding, stay at it, stay faithful. Lots of little advances make for a large victory. Keep grinding. That was the ministry of Elisha. Just year after year, decade after decade, miracle after miracle, visit after visit, journey after journey, counsel after counsel. He was a piece of furniture in Israel at this time. He was the father. It's called that over and over again. My father, father, my father, my father. You actually get it quite a little bit when you read 2 Kings 6 and 7. And then also she mentions it, I think at least once, maybe twice. So just keep grinding, brothers and sisters. Like just carry on with Jesus, and cumulatively over the course of your life lived for him, big things can happen. Giant things can happen, right? Erosion doesn't normally happen in one great big, massive event. You do get mudslides or whatnot, but in general, it's just a little bit at a time. Just keep grinding, stay the course, stay with Jesus, and God will do great things through you, through your ministry, through your family, through your prayers, through your efforts. Keep grinding. And then finally, the promise. My promise is all of those promises in that final paragraph. Psalm 116:15, Proverbs 14:32, Psalm 49:15, Job 19:25, Psalm 17:15. All those promises say God has got death sorted out. God has death sorted out. He's got it figured out. He's got it fixed. He has triumphed over sin. He has conquered death. That is my promise. 5 scriptural promises that let us know that death is not going to have the last laugh or the last word. All right, everybody, what was your word? What was your word? And then I'll tell you my word. I'm really excited about my word here. What do we got? All right. We can only run the race if we are filled with the spirit of the divine logos, the spirit of truth, messenger, victory. Death, where is your sting, says Olivier. Perseverance, great word, Reiner. Oh, they're going by too fast. Here we go. Perseverance, steadfast, presence, remnant, unwavering. Cassandra, that's my word. Faithful. That's my word, faithful. I'll come back to that. Power. Tennessee Quiltbug, faithful. Oh, what's going on here? Sketch with DA, temper. Dino says faithful. Arlene, faithful. Jennifer, I love you. Miss you. Great talking on the phone today briefly. Longing, she says. Ooh, I'd have to better understand that. I like it though. Faithful, allegiance, opened, teacher, confidence. Never, never, always. Yeah, wasn't that good? Wasn't that so good? Behold, regeneration, faithfulness, faithful, endurance. Straight, S-T-R-A-I-T. Katiyaj says, I know it's a little negative, but I kept thinking that God delivers from straight places. Great, love it. Ripened. His, as in chosen, and 16 other times it was used. Oh, as in the possessive, his. Got it. Like it. Teacher, fullness, proclaim, says Sandy. Stefan says, oh, very good word here. You don't hear this word very often. Indefatigable, which means incapable of being fatigued, and faithful. Great word, by the way. Gabby Abby says, open. God opened their eyes. Brilliant. Presence, unwavered. That Lee 4 says fruitful. Minka Wasteman says counselor. K Last FC 345 says 2 days in a row I had your word. Hey, that's awesome. 2 days in a row I had your word. Sustained. Purpose, says Jerry Beth D. Let's see. Perseverance, sustained, confident. Perseverance, says Bernice. Hey, Bernice, love you, sister. Can't wait to see you. What is this one? Anatome says fulfilled. Okay, I said the word faithful because the word occurs, I think 4 times. Let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4 times. And always in reference to the longevity of Elisha's ministry, with one exception, where it's in reference to the church, as living in light of the example of Elisha's faithful ministry. Let me just read them here. 2:43. To all the prophet bore faithful witness in a time on every hand truth was being perverted, and the great majority of the people were in open rebellion against heaven. Brilliant. The next one. Thus the man of God continued to labor from year to year, drawing close to the people in faithful ministry, and in times of crisis, standing by the side of kings as a wise counselor. So that's 2 references to Elisha. Then she does the reference to the church. God calls upon his faithful ones who believe in him to talk courage to those who are unbelieving and hopeless. And then finally, and I hoped that this would happen. I actually liked the word faithful, and I was like, I really hope she uses faithful at the end of the chapter. And she did. In a perfect place, too. With the counsel and encouragement given Joash, the work of Elisha closed. He upon whom had fallen in full measure the Spirit resting upon Elijah had proved faithful to the end. Clearly, the major theme of this chapter is the faithfulness, not just of Elisha to the people and Elisha to Yahweh, but the overarching faithfulness of Yahweh to Elisha. That's the real faithfulness on offer here. Never had he wavered. Never had he lost his trust in the power of omnipotence. Always, when the way before him seemed utterly closed, he had still advanced by faith, and God had honored his confidence and opened the way before him. Faithful, 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 faithful. But the backdrop to all of Elisha's faithfulness was Yahweh's original and originating faithfulness. Elisha's faithfulness was a response, right? God is the originator. We are the responder, right? Faith begets faith. Love begets love. Loyalty begets loyalty. Hope begets hope, right? Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. This was a great chapter. We're back tomorrow to talk about Jonah. I think Jonah. Tomorrow, same time, same place. Isn't it Jonah? Yep. We're going to be talking about Jonah. I love the book of Jonah. Short chapter for a great book. Looking forward to it. Love you all. Let's close with prayer. Father in heaven, help us to learn from, be inspired by, and instructed by the incredible, faithful, prophetically faithful ministry of Elisha. And then, Father, help us in our own spheres with our own dispositions and attitudes and situations and circumstances and callings to be faithful, grinding day after day, year after year, decade after decade. Father, you've been so faithful to us, never letting us down, never forsaking us, always there when we call for you. Father, open our eyes that we might see things as they are, and help us to press on day by day from glory to glory, believing that you are for us, not against us, and that if you are for us, no one can stand against us. Father, make us faithful, a faint reflection of your incredible, indefatigable faithfulness to us. Father, may we reflect some of that faithfulness back to you. By your Spirit is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen and amen and amen.